welcome to Mornings with Planning, a webinar series hosted the first Wednesday of every month, where the Lexington Division of Planning discusses new ways to reconnect, reimagine, and respond in a new reality. These webinars will be held live via Zoom and on Lex TV. It is also being recorded for later viewing at imaginelexington.com, as well as Saturday at 1 p.m. on Lex TV. This webinar is eligible for AICP credit. My name is Samantha Castro. I'm Senior Planner with the Lexington Division of Planning, and I will be your moderator for today's March 2nd, 2022 session. During this webinar, we will have an exciting panel of current and former planning directors from across the region. So kick back with your morning coffee or tea, and let's meet today's panelists. We have 4 panelists today, including Emily Liu, Louisville Metro Director of Planning and Design Services, Taiwo Jayoba, newly appointed Greensboro, North Carolina City Manager, and formerly the City of Charlotte Assistant City Manager and Director of Planning, Design, and Development, Amy Brooks, Director of Knoxville, Knox County Planning, and our own Jim Duncan, City of Lexington Director of Planning. So panelists, thank you for joining us this morning. We'll begin today with sort of a brief overview of your background. So Emily, why don't you tell us a little about yourself and maybe give some context to the folks here in Lexington on how the Metro government works there in Louisville. We seem to have a pretty simple system here with a single city and county combined government, but I know that's not the case for you all in Louisville.
Yes, let me talk about Louisville first. So Louisville is, as you mentioned, is a consolidated government. So the city and county merged 2003. So we are under, this big umbrella of Louisville Metro government. It's a big area too. It's 400 square miles. So think about Washington, D.C. It's about 68 square miles. So about 8 times the size of Washington, D.C. And also population-wise. So according to Census 2020, our population right now stands approximately 783,000. So we are the top 30 cities in the United States because of combined city and county. So Louisville, I've been with Louisville Metro government for about 11 years. Since 2013, I serve as the Director of Louisville Metro Planning and Design Services. Also, by default, I'm the planning director referencing a lot of documents. So my own background, I'm an immigrant to the United States. I went to school at the George Washington University. I got my master's degree in urban and regional planning. I just got a chance to connect with my professor just last week, and he's doing great. And then I went on to work for in Columbus, Ohio. I work at the airport there, and then moved to the Chicago area. I work for the Lake County. And then prior to this job, I work in Oldham County. So my entire career has been, I have been a public servant. I'm very proud of that. So I have about 27 professional planning experience. Currently, planning design, our office, of course, is in charge or in coordination with the Planning Commission and the citizens of the comprehensive plan, and more importantly, the Land Development Code, which is the zoning. So our office does mostly current planning, including zoning subdivisions, development plan, also urban design, historic preservation. We also do zoning enforcement. So there are different aspects in our office. And I'm very proud that I'm really working closely with my colleagues at Planning Design. We have about 50 people there. Very excited to work with them for the last almost 11 years. A very talented group of planners. I'm very, very proud to be their colleague. So that's about me.
Great. Thank you so much, Emily. Taiwo, we'd love to hear a little more about you, including how you recently took on a new position as the city manager for Greensboro. Can you tell us a little bit about how being, the director of planning for the city of Charlotte kind of compares to being a city manager, how they might overlap?
Thank you very much, Sam. Good morning, everyone, and it's good to be on the same panel with you all. Yes, so I took on this job one month ago, actually, this week. And prior to that, of course, I was in Charlotte as the planning director as well as assistant city manager. But prior to Charlotte, I was a private consultant with HNTB, and I led the planning effort for Southeastern United States, both transportation planning and land use planning. We're a little different from Louisville Metro because we're in Charlotte. It's a city of about 870-some thousand people, making it the largest city in North Carolina, but also the 16th largest in the country. And it's within Mecklenburg County. Now, the trick with Charlotte is that it's actually Charlotte-Mecklenburg Planning Department. In other words, while the department manages planning and zoning activities for the city of Charlotte, it also has responsibilities for any planning activities in the county, especially in the unincorporated areas and areas that were called extraterritorial jurisdictions. The interesting thing about the governance in Charlotte is that all the building permits or whatever it is that were processed by the city only had to do with the land. The county processed everything that was vertical, including issuing certificates of occupancy. The city was never involved in that. And so there was always that tension and that friction between the two entities. But as a fast-growing city, Charlotte had not had a comprehensive plan since 1975. So when I started in 2018, it was the first thing that I embarked upon. And thankfully, so we were able to get it done. In the absence of a comprehensive plan, Charlotte was managing its land use through multiple community area plans and transit-oriented. As some of you may know, Charlotte has a light rail system, and every station had an area plan around it. And so when you put all those area plans, focused on transit and focused on other parts of the city together, Charlotte had about 115 different plans, small plans. And I felt that really perpetuated inequity, because if your voice was louder, you are likely going to get resources to update your area plans quicker. So there were areas that had area plans dating back to 1987 that had never been updated, and most were in the Black and brown communities. And there were areas that had most updated plans. Those were also in the areas where they were affluent members of the community who would push hard for it. A month ago, when I became planning city manager here, one of the reasons that the city of Greensboro actually took interest in me was because not only did I manage planning in Charlotte, but I also managed the public transit system as well as the Charlotte Department of Transportation. And Greensboro had just adopted its own comprehensive plan. And so they needed someone who could help to champion both of those as a growing city. And so one of the key things in the Greensboro's comprehensive plan is that it wants to be car optional. It wants to be the best mid-sized American city by 2040, but also become car optional. The difference between how Greensboro is managed in terms of planning and Charlotte is that Greensboro is within Guilford County. Guilford County actually has its own separate planning department too. And Greensboro has its own planning department. And there's always that tension in governance. But I feel that as a city manager and also my counterpart who is a county manager, we come from different places of experience. And when we sat down to speak last week, we both told ourselves that we've got to find a way to make sure that, you know, whatever is good for Guilford is good for Greensboro. Whatever is good for Greensboro is good for Guilford. And so it's really governance, but at the end of the day, it's about leadership. I believe that planners make the best city managers because you're able to really see everything from different perspectives. And I just think that experience that I had in Charlotte can be easily transferred into my new role. Greensboro is the third largest city in North Carolina, but it's also a city that's growing really fast. We just attracted about 4,000 jobs within the last 3 months alone. And so I think that planning becomes a very crucial aspect of that, whether it's land use or public transportation.
Wow, you guys sound very busy so far. Amy, I've heard the slogan, keep Knoxville scruffy before. So how does that sort of kind of uniquely East Tennessee attitude translate into how you plan?
question. Good morning, everyone. I think, East Tennesseans, planners naturally want to collaborate with other planners and reach out and hear what other communities are doing. And I think that's been one of the most challenging things about working in East Tennessee is, I think it's changing, but I think that attitude has been like, well, we do it a certain way and, that doesn't apply to us. So, to that question, Samantha, regarding, keep Knoxville scruffy, I think that probably it comes from that that perspective. We are a joint city-county planning agency that operate within a government, two separate governments. So we have Knox County, who has their own mayor, and the city of Knoxville, who have their own mayor. So I report to both of those individuals directly. We also have the town of Farragut within Knox County proper that has their own planning department that we also do some coordination with as well. But, in terms of, we also are getting ready to embark upon a large range transportation land use process. And we have been reaching out to other folks and asking, what they've been doing and what's been working. And so again, going back to that question, and honestly, I don't think that keep Knoxville scruffy terminology applies to the county. I think that they're very different in their approach to all things land use and transportation. And, that's been one of our challenges as the planning agency is to be able to operate within both of those environments and try to bring them together to work towards common goals. Because as we all know, land use and transportation really don't know jurisdictional boundaries. And the people of our county don't necessarily recognize those as well. And we live in a very large county, which is, I think it's a little over 400 square miles. And we have a population of close to 470,000.
Great. And last but not least, Jim, you've worked your way up through the Division of Planning. What do you see as some of the biggest milestones or shifts in how the division has tackled planning over the years since you've been with it?
Well, good morning, Sam, and good morning to the panel and to you all. Thank you all for having us here today. I think, first of all, I think we're very fortunate in Lexington, Fayette County, because we have now for 50 years had a single government. There's only one government. It's Lexington, Fayette Urban County government. And even before that, we've always, even from the 1930s, only had one planning commission. So it's been very easy to have a unified vision for the community. That doesn't mean that everyone agrees necessarily on everything that we should do, but we're all with only one government and only one regulatory agency. It really helps us to focus our efforts. And I think some of the things that have been very successful in Lexington that we've been able to continue to build on are first of all the urban service boundary, because that helps us direct where our urban services and our urban growth goes, and helps us to maintain a strong and rural and agricultural area. But I think in my time here, I think we've really accelerated that. We've been able to do that, but we've been also able to do much better at talking about how important it is to use the available land that is designated for urban development, and how to refocus the question on what infill and redevelopment means in terms of neighborhoods and gentrification and displacement and efficiencies with public resources, and then rural land preservation. So I think that's been what we've been really working on probably for the past 10 years and making great strides in, particularly over the past 3 as we've been implementing our latest comprehensive plan with focuses and efforts on how do we do our infill better so that we can preserve our rural land for its intended purpose.
Well, great, thank you, everyone. So let's move into some of the questions here. We received loads of questions from registrants on everything ranging from quality of life, planning for an aging population, missing middle and affordable housing, and how to plan for climate change. These have been integrated into the questions that will be coming to you. And thank you all the registrants for sharing your thoughts and curiosities. Audience members and attendants, feel free to submit questions using the Q&A functionality. And we'll work to cover that content alongside the questions submitted via the registration form. So this first one, and like I said, I'd like to keep this as a conversation since all of you have very similar viewpoints. I'd like to, have you all just jump in as you see. But this first one, I guess I'll shoot it towards Emily first, and everyone can kind of fall in afterwards. But how is kind of long-term planning handled in each jurisdiction? Does everyone use a comprehensive plan or similar to guide growth and development in your city? Emily, you're on mute still.
Yes, got it. So as I mentioned earlier, Louisville is a consolidated government, city and county merged. So we have one comprehensive plan, which is great, and one planning commission. And that has been the case in 1958. So Louisville has its very first comprehensive plan in 1931, but that's only for the city of Louisville. And then the next round of comprehensive plan, which I mentioned in 1958, the comprehensive plan take all the county and city as a combined, which is a very important milestone in my opinion. So since then, we've been have one comprehensive plan. We've been having one planning commission. However, in Jefferson County, in addition to Louisville Metro government, which have the zoning authority, we also have 12 other cities has its own zoning. So even though we have one comprehensive plan, but we have 13 different zoning authority and multiple different zoning ordinances. That kind of a little challenge too, in its own way. It's even though we have one planning commission. So how the long range plan is handled, our office work closely. Actually, we have another office called Advanced Planning, work together and develop the latest comprehensive plan, which is Plan 2040. And the Planning Commission is really in charge of implement that plan, comprehensive plan. As everybody know here, probably it's at least this panel, the comprehensive plan is a guide. It's not a requirement, it's a recommendation and policy. So in Louisville, we use that comprehensive plan. The latest one is Plan 2040 to guide development in the community, but it's not a requirement. But what is important for the comprehensive plan is it set the parameter for the zoning. So all zoning update, the zoning ordinance has to be in compliance with a comprehensive plan. And also changing zoning, that we have zoning tax amendment, right? Need to be in compliance with comprehensive plan. But if somebody want to change zoning from residential, low density to higher density or commercial, industrial, then the comprehensive plan is has been used to guide or as a recommendation policy to guide that change in zoning. So I would say the comprehensive plan play a major role in shaping the development of Louisville, but there are other factors as well. I would like to give you one example is transportation. Somebody mentioned, Amy, I think, transportation and land use. It's sometimes it's hard to say which chicken egg. So Louisville, the city of Louisville is shaped greatly by the transportation. The city is actually established because of Ohio River. In those days, the river is your highway. So the transport goods and even people. And over the years, we have streetcars, which really impact land use to once we have the streetcar in Louisville, allows the residential to move away from downtown and kind of having surrounding neighborhoods. And then obviously we also have railroad shape a lot of industry in Louisville. We all know in the 50s and 60s, the federal government gave us free money. Jim, Lexington, I don't know how you did that. You resisted those free money, so you do not have highway run through your downtown. But Louisville, just like 99% of the city across the country, accepted the money. And we have this highway system running through each different ways through downtown and also across the suburban area. And that's why we start to see the population shifted to the suburban area. So I would say the highways, the railroad, the streetcar, even the Ohio River play a major role in shaping the land use and development in Louisville.
Yeah, Emily. Amy, I know you had talked a little bit about kicking off kind of a major transportation plan. Do you all do comprehensive planning then as well, or is it all sort of incorporated?
We do. And I'll have to apologize. There's some folks cleaning my window right now. So if it's a little loud, let me know and I'll. Yes, so we do comprehensive planning here. It's administered out of our office. We do rezonings, development plan review, and the long range planning work. We have our current general plan is for the city and the county and so it was adopted in 2003. So it's almost 20 years old. We have multiple layers of plans that we administer. So we also have what's called a growth policy plan, and that was adopted in 2001. And there are many communities across the state of Tennessee that have those in place. And those really do guide where we can grow. And the intent of that was twofold at the time. Was one, to try to curb annexations that were happening in some of our larger jurisdictions, but also set the parameters for what's rural, urban, and what could be planned growth. So where could we accommodate growth over the next 20 years? So that plan is out of date. And that was one of the impetuses for undertaking the advanced Knox planning process, which is specifically for Knox County. And I'll talk a little bit about that in just a second, but additional layers of plans that we have are called sector plans. So we have divided the county up into 12 sectors, and they're essentially based off of census tracts. And so this community has been doing that for a number of years now. So when we update plans, the intent was to try to update them on a more frequent basis. And those, once they were updated, would become part of that general plan. And then the city has another layer, which is called the 1-year plan. And that is something that we are tasked with undertaking every year to make sure that any zoning requests that go forward also are not getting out of line with that long range planning effort. So the advanced Knox planning process is specifically for Knox County. The city of Knoxville and the town of Farragut that I mentioned earlier are not part of that. I mean, they will be partners, so they are at the table. But the county felt like it was really important for them to undertake their own comprehensive plan and focus on transportation and come up with a capital improvement program out of that, because currently they don't plan long-term for infrastructure investments in the county.
Great. Taiwo, same question to you. I guess you could either use your Charlotte hat or your Greensboro hat.
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that so Greensboro has had a tradition of managing its long-range plans using comprehensive plan. Started a tradition, and like Emily said, even though it's not necessarily mandated, it's really a guide. But the state of North Carolina actually requires a comprehensive plan. What it doesn't say is what that should look like. That's why different communities will just come up with different things, and they're never the same. Charlotte, though, had a tradition way back in the 1970s. I believe the Charlotte's first comprehensive plan was 1975. And then in 1985, they revised the 1975 comprehensive plan, but rather than make it a comprehensive plan citywide that's cohesive, what that plan did was to break Charlotte into 5 geographic areas and use those 5 geographic areas to manage long range. But then each of those 5 geographic areas now created their own community area plans, which resulted in, again, that 100 and some community area plans. And when you have so many plans, it's like you have no vision. And so, now that we have a comprehensive plan in Charlotte, 2040 plan, that's supposed to manage the long range plan over the next 20 years. And different from Louisville Metro, though, is that Charlotte is also working on a unified development ordinance, so that one plan, one zoning regulation, not multiple. But I'll finish with this. Back in 2013, metropolitan planning organization, or a council of government, actually. I don't know how it's structured in your jurisdictions, but the metropolitan planning organization for the 2.5 county region is within the City of Charlotte's planning department. So there is a separate council of government, separate from the Metropolitan Transit Organization. That council of government oversees about 14 different jurisdictions, including in South Carolina and North Carolina. So 2 states, 14 different jurisdictions. They came up with what's called Connect Our Future. I believe it's connectourfuture.org or so, which really talked about how that 14 county region should grow over the next 20 years. And each one of the small entities within that jurisdiction ended up having a comprehensive plan to manage their strategic growth over many years, except Charlotte, the largest city of all of them. That was back in 2013. So now that Charlotte has a comprehensive plan, all those jurisdictions within that metro area now have a comprehensive plan, not only to manage growth within their respective cities, but to manage growth region-wide. Now, discussions could be different as to how that is done, but I thought that that was a brilliant move way back in 2013 to do something for the entire region that really impacted how each jurisdiction should manage their growth going forward.
Fantastic. Jim, how about us here?
Well, comprehensive planning, like in Louisville, has a long tradition. Our first comprehensive plan was in 1931 as well, and we've been updating it regularly ever since. And then probably about 40 years ago, the legislature actually required that the comprehensive plans in Kentucky be reviewed every 5 years. By many counts, Kentucky has a progressive planning statute, because not only does it require frequent review of comprehensive plans, but it does also state what should be considered and included in those comprehensive plans. So it provides good guidance. But then ultimately, as others have said on the panel, the comprehensive plan is a guide. In fact, it's even been interpreted by the courts as saying it's a guide, not a straitjacket. So it's meant to inform decisions such as zone changes and then other types of development. And in Lexington, we take that 5-year update very seriously. We almost always completely recast the plan every 5 years. And quite frankly, that's getting to be a bit exhausting, because that means we also can't complete the implementation of the plan before we're starting the next one. And I think, as most people would agree, a comprehensive plan is really meant to be something that's a vision for 20 years and beyond. So we hope that as we update the 2018 comprehensive plan, which is the one we have now, that we can carry forward many of the good recommendations from that plan and continue on implementing that without turning it upside down and starting over again. And I believe that we've seen that there'll be support for that, particularly over the past 2 years, since things have changed about the way we do business, and maybe things didn't move quite as quickly as they should have during that time. So we've got some catching up to do, and that's what we're hoping to do with our planning over the next few years.
Fantastic. I want to get straight into sort of a hard-hitting question, but I think one that we are all facing currently. As you all are aware, the American Institute of Certified Planners just updated their code of ethics to include diversity, equity, and inclusion as sort of a main tenet, specifically talking about systemic practices of racism in planning, long-standing, going back to redlining. So how do each of your jurisdictions, how are you tackling this very difficult and overarching topic in moving forward? I'll take anyone that wants to jump in.
I know so when we started our comprehensive plan, that's a very good question. And I believe Emily and I are signatories to the American Planning Association initiative on DEI. But prior to us having the comprehensive plan in Charlotte, we started with what we call an equity atlas, which was to really map the entire city and put numbers on it. For example, how quickly will fire services or police services get to communities of color and low-income areas versus areas of affluence and predominantly where white residents live? And we found out that it was huge disparity in terms of fire services provision, just in terms of even how street lights are replaced in communities of color and low-income areas. We also quickly found out that, the average income, the percentage of those who are educated, and we know that education is often connected to influence. And so you found out that the lack of education was very huge, especially when it comes to influencing decision-making process. So that equity atlas captured a lot of things. But what the motivation for that was that back in 2015, when the Harvard Chetty study looked at the 50 largest cities in the United States, found that Charlotte was 50 out of 50 when it comes to upward mobility. If you were born in a poor zip code, or you were born in a Black and brown zip code, chances are that you would die poor in that same zip code. And that all affected mostly Black population and to a degree Hispanic population. And so the city was shocked because that's the second largest financial center in the country after New York. And Charlotte likes to, not even likes to, Charlotte is a center of affluence. There's a lot of banks and prosperity. And to think that within the shadows of that prosperity is huge poverty, especially among communities of color who lived so close to Center City, that was a shock for the city. And so everything that the city did afterwards really was, how do we get out of this? How do we make it better? And so we couldn't go into that comprehensive plan without first of all looking at what those specific numbers were. And that eventually influenced those policies around single family housing, getting rid of exclusionary housing, understanding that it was used as a tool for segregation. That also factored into a policy that says over the next 20 years, the city will drive capital dollars into vulnerable communities. It also influenced the policy around anti-displacement commission that will really make sure that these communities of color, while gentrification may not be avoided, you can at least mitigate and minimize displacement. And so that equity atlas, while it was the very first thing that we did, it was something that threaded throughout the entire comprehensive plan. But one thing also was, for me as planning director back then in Charlotte, I had to look internally in our organization too. Do we actually mirror the community that we serve? I was a Black planning director, but the fact is that if you look in the organization, most of the minority staff members were administrative staff. They had no influence on zoning decisions. They had no influence on, and we did not mirror our own community. Charlotte had about 50-some% minority population, but the planning department probably had less than 10%, maybe even 5%. And the leadership, I was the only African American, I was the only minority in the leadership, frankly speaking. And so it's not enough to talk about what the community should look like, but it's very important for us, even as planning departments, to take a hard look at our own department, at the constitution of our department, that do we really truly mirror, the type of demographics that we see in our own community. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get that done before I left the city because HR has to be involved in that, and you can't be hiring people simply because of their color, right? I mean, you got to also bring in qualified people. And so now I found out that I'm in Greensboro, it's even worse, and so it's not just Charlotte, it's not just Louisville, it's not just Lexington. I think that's a problem that we have nationally, and that as leaders, something we have to deliberately look into as to how can we make sure that DEI becomes not just something we talk about, but something we actually do that's reflected in our policies, but also in our staffing makeup.
Thank you, Taylor. That resonates so crystal clear with me. I'm on the DEI committee for the state APA, and we were having that discussion just the other day of how do we encourage more diverse planners within our planning departments so that we can represent, be representative of the community that we serve. Emily.
I think the planning profession as a whole is not diverse, and that's kind of a part of the issue as well. You know, as many of you know, that everybody struggle with the new turnovers, and we do have quite a few vacancies. One of the things we're trying to do as much as we can is, of course, qualification is very important, maybe broaden that search a little bit, and also trying at the minimum to include a minority candidate in the interview, you know, just keep extend the base to see if you have at least interview a people of color. Even that is very difficult. A lot of time we've got applicants, you know, just applicants not very diverse. So that's something we continue to work on. It's not a quick solution. I think we as a planners, as a profession, need to work hard. We may want to start at high school and grade school level to get education about planning, how important the planning profession is, shaping the community, the future of the community, especially. So there's a lot of work to do. I'm not happy where we are now, but we are all working hard toward that goal. And also the decision makers. I'm talking about the Planning Commission, the Board of Zone Adjustment, the Landmark Commission, the Overlay Committee, all of those under planning design. We do very hard. I think we did a great job having a diverse board in terms of gender. Used to be when I first started, out of 10 planning commission, 1 woman. So now we have 5 and 5. People of color, make sure they are represented on the board, because the decision is very important. Staff make decisions too, but we are mostly making smaller cases. All the major cases go to the planning commission. So our planning commission right now really represent our community, not just gender, race, but also party affiliation, whether Democrat, Republican. We have a little trouble having the younger generation to sign up, I guess, the time commitment. But other than that, our board is relatively diverse. And that's part of that, because Metro Council and the Mayor's Office also work very hard to make sure our board represent our community. I think that's something, I don't think there's an excuse to not have a board, because you know you have a much larger pool. You don't have to be a planner to sit on the board. So that's we've been very successful from that perspective.
Thank you. I guess this is maybe a little bit of a follow-up to that. You know, how do you all involve the community in the planning process? You know, what are some of the best ways that you find to engage the public, particularly marginalized, underserved groups? You know, do you have examples of what you consider to be successes that you think have worked to try and bring everyone to the table?
Sam, I'd like to comment on that, because that's important to us to be able to have that outreach, to make sure that we have community input into the decisions, so that there's acceptance and support for those decisions. And certainly reaching to the underserved community is a challenge. And it's been even a bigger challenge since we've not been able to do sort of the traditional outreach that we're accustomed to. But I think as we're able to pick that back up, we have found that by certainly working with the council members who represent certain underserved areas and identifying leaders in those areas, and working with them to set up neighborhood input meetings, to even, as some of the others have talked about, doing small area plans for some of those communities, and finding the leadership in there to be involved in that has been effective. But it takes some effort, because as much as, at least in Lexington, as we think everybody loves and adores and understands planning, I think when we really find out that most of the community isn't really even aware of us until some sort of controversy shows up in their neighborhood, a zone change or a board of adjustment request that they're not happy about. So that's part of the challenge as well, is just to make sure that planning is understood across the community, but especially in places that may be more vulnerable or underserved, so that they can participate and be a part of the decision-making process. And that really just takes outreach. It takes work. it takes, and we're going to have to be clever with electronic means and social media means of outreach as well, and open to different ways of communicating with people as they're comfortable communicating. So I think that's an evolving issue for us, but one that we're very much committed to continue to try for success.
We have had success in the past. So we recently worked with the city of Knoxville to update their zoning ordinance. And it was very important for us to try to get a wide range of people involved, which is, as you all have already touched on, is really challenging. So working with local partners, organizations such as the Central Hispano and other nonprofits, as well as the Urban League, we had a lot of success with one local nonprofit and them getting tablets and going out. They do that for other projects they work on, but we ended up getting a lot of really quality feedback that way. It's hard to do that, and you have to have the resources, because I think it's really important also to make sure that those people are compensated for the work that they're doing for us. So oftentimes it's dependent on grants or other, we're relying on these bigger projects to be able to engage the community in that way. We also have really internally tried to change how we talk about the work that we do. We have a pretty diverse web and tech team who we produce reports on disability, senior populations. I have a speaker series around where we've really tried to focus in on equity. But then having that group help translate a lot of the way that we talk as planners has been really beneficial. Again, I don't think, as Emily touched on, I don't think we're there yet. And oftentimes it can be disappointing because I think we have a lot more work to do, but those are just a few things that we've been trying to do here.
I'll tell you that when I started here a month ago as the city manager, I embarked on a series of listening sessions there are 5 council districts. So started going to each council district, 2 meetings for each council district to just go out. I know that, people are still in that pandemic mind frame that some are afraid to go out, but there are some who really want to get out. So we've been doing it, and out there people are coming, and we're also streaming it on YouTube as well. At the same time, we engaged a company to start doing a community survey, because we know there are people who do not have the time. Like Emily said, some of our younger generation, the time commitment, even some low-income people may not be able to come because they have to do different things. Childcare is an issue for a number of people still, and so having that mindset is important. But back to Charlotte, prior to the COVID, we started our comprehensive plan. I believe we were able to engage about 500,000 people overall, both in person and also, and that was even before COVID, in person and also via social media. But once COVID hit and we wanted to adopt a plan, we did a drive-in movie theater style engagement where we actually had a huge screen, and people drove in. I think about 300 and something vehicles drove in, probably for a few hours. And just so that we can overcome the language barrier, we had people go to a particular radio frequency that will translate the presentation to different languages for people. That was a huge success for us. And in addition to that, we had door hangers. We had a number of volunteers. We went to elementary schools because during the pandemic, of course, schools were not opening. But because of the lunch meal programs, there were kids who still depended on schools to provide meals. So we engaged the providers of those meals, gave them, colored books about planning the city of the future to give to the kids to color them and return them to us. I think we got about 1,100 color sheets back that reflected what our elementary school and middle schoolers think. I think Amy said it right. We have to go to people. We have to go where they are. And Jim said it right. We've got to be open. And I wrote this down, Jim, open to different ways of engaging. And I think that's really the key word. We've got to be open, to different ways of engaging. Again, because of the digital divide, we don't want to miss anyone. And really, it's going to take a lot of effort on our part to do it post-pandemic, if there's anything like post-pandemic, that is.
Well, this also allows me to put in a little plug. I saw Valerie drop it in the chat, but for our On the Table event that's being put on by Civic Lex, which is a week of community conversations about Lexington's future from April 10th to the 16th. Thousands of residents across Lexington will gather in homes, businesses, libraries, parks, and even virtually to discuss the present and future of our city. In addition to gathering and talking, all participants will complete a survey about how Lexington is growing and changing. And that data will be used by the Division of Planning to shape Lexington's map for the future through our comprehensive plan, the City of Lexington's most important planning document. And you can sign up to host a table or to be placed at a table at ottlex.org. Okay, kind of switching subjects a little bit, and this one came in the questions. How all do you deal with the sort of balance between infill and redevelopment or new developments on greenfield sites? We're constrained by our urban service boundary, but it sounds like you all each have your own version of constraints of where you can and choose to grow. So how do you deal with infill, and then also sort of the ramifications and what we're hearing about how infill might play into gentrification?
Well, I'll start to answer part of the question, I guess. So how balanced development and it grows. So in Louisville, I did mention earlier, but in Louisville and also Oldham County too, the difference is in Louisville and Oldham County, we pre-zoned the entire county. So back in the 60s, every single inch of land in Louisville is zoned a minimum of residential. What means, the government gave that right to the property. So we do not have agriculture zoning or conservation zoning to hold that development. So it's everybody was given that right to develop their land, even though they're being used for farmland for hundreds of years, they were given. So they are basically encouraged to develop that land to a minimum of residential. And that's one of the reasons you see a lot of growth in the suburban so easy. And because once you're given that right, it's not a discretionary review. So when they are ready to develop that, we have a set of standard in subdivision. If you meet the standards, there's no choice but to approve that. That's why a lot of citizens maybe don't understand. We're upset. Why do you approve this subdivision next to me in my backyard? That's because that land had the right that were given to them back in the 60s. So if they just meet all the standards, they has to be approved. In other city in Kentucky, you don't even need to go to planning commission for subdivision. Staff will approve that. In Louisville, we at least send it to the planning commission review, but the planning commission has very little discretion about denying that. So if they meet standard, approve. So that's kind of our hands are tied in that perspective. And by the way, the comprehensive plan does not apply to subdivision regulations. So when we look at subdivision, we strictly look at the subdivision regulation and the zoning. If they meet the standard, comprehensive plan was not even being brought into the picture. I think that's one of the really restriction. I know Lexington has a growth boundary, and you focus on investing in that area for infrastructure, and then kind of managed growth. But in Louisville, it's kind of difficult from that perspective.
Taiwo or Amy, to either of you, how do you deal with infill?
With infill, I mean, it depends on if you're in the city or county here in the Knoxville area, but the city with their new zoning code really was very intentional in trying to encourage development where we already had infrastructure in place and allowing it, by right. So you wouldn't have to go through special approvals through the Planning Commission in order to move forward. So along our main corridors where we already have transit in place. And the city also has something called the infill housing overlay. And there is an additional level of review within that overlay. But one thing that we have decided to do recently is to waive fees for projects within that infill district. So they still need to come in for review, but we won't charge individuals for their applications, and as well as some applications that are in our historic districts, like additions, minor modifications. We'll just do that staff level review, no fee charge. So it's an attempt to try to incentivize people to develop where we already have that infrastructure in place.
So we have a redevelopment commission that owns properties in blighted areas for infill. One of the first goal in the City of Greensboro's comprehensive plan is filling in the gaps with middle density housing. And because we believe that that's one way you can actually take advantage of those properties that we own right now as a city. It's not by putting one single use on them, but putting mixed use development on them. And also, if you're going to do housing, you do higher density housing, not necessarily apartments, and so that's one way we've been addressing it. Amy talked about waiving fees. In Charlotte, there are by right development that you could do, but what we talk about is we will reimburse those fees. So you pay them up front, and then once it goes through and we know you're actually building, and once a certificate of occupancy is issued, we can reimburse you the fees. I mean, that's kind of an idea that really has not started, but something that we put on the table. But infill has been one way by which people could still build and be closer enough to Center City where the jobs are, rather than going out in the green fields. And how can we make it more suitable for them? Now, the Charlotte doesn't have a redevelopment commission like Greensboro does, but I believe that that's a really good thing that the city has a redevelopment commission that actually owns land within the city that are excess land, and now RFP those land to developers, but there are criteria that you have to fulfill in order to be able to build on those.
Fantastic. So we're getting close to wrapping up. So I want to just ask kind of a rapid fire to all of you of what is kind of like next on the horizon. Like, what's the next big ticket item that you're looking at in terms of what's progressive and what's cool and interesting that's coming down the pipeline for each of your cities. Jim, why don't you go first?
We have, I think we want to continue what we've been doing for the past several years, and that's incrementally updating our zoning ordinance and subdivision regulations to address some of the issues of equity and diversity, but also to enable infill to be more accepted and more efficient. And we have several things still coming up. We're looking at our parking standards and how those could be reimagined in a world where driving may be changing, and certainly where we're trying to enable success for our transit. We're looking at some of our residential zones that are just no longer functioning. They were perhaps redesigned a number of years ago to solve one problem, but now they're not solving any problems. And so we're looking at those to see how they can be better. And as Taiwo said, not necessarily for big multifamily housing, but some of the missing middle housing that we've been trying to achieve, so that kind of infill and that kind of housing doesn't have really an impact on the neighborhood, but it has a huge impact on people who actually need housing. So I would say some of those kinds of things, looking at our open space and green space standards going forward, and certainly how those are meaningful for accessibility for our diverse populations. I think, Sam, that's going to be the most critical thing that we can do for the next several years, is to continue to modernize our regulations to address these problems. And we've had good success so far, and I hope we can continue to build on that.
Amy?
I've mentioned advanced Knox. So this is we're really excited to be undertaking this along with Knox County. So looking at transportation and land use and developing that plan over the next 18 months with the intent to then tackle our codes. So that's really exciting on that end. And in the city, we have that new zoning code that I mentioned that we completed a couple of years ago, but we will be undertaking a missing middle. Jim just mentioned missing middle. We're going to do a missing middle scan within the next 6 months to look at take a closer look at that code, because I think we missed the mark and we need to make some improvements. And I'm a big believer in incrementalism, as Jim also mentioned, and I think there's some tweaks that can be made. And what we learned from that, we're hoping to apply that to the advanced NOx process. And then additionally, Vision Zero, our mayor for the city of Knoxville is very firmly committed to develop an implementation plan for that over the next few months. So those are some of the big ticket items.
Emily.
Yes, I have to say that. So one of the biggest projects we're working on is our land development code reform. And it looked like it got national attention. So we started about 18 months ago. We make a lot of progress. Actually, phase 1 has been adopted. So that land development code reform is really focused on equity review of our zoning ordinance. And there are 6 recommendations. I'm just going to use one. One is accessory dwelling unit. For 70 years, Louisville is trying to do something with accessory dwelling unit. Finally, last summer, Metro Council adopted a by right ADU. So just last month, you hosted the ADU conference. It was amazing 2-day conference. So I think that was really, that was really important. And I also want to tie that to a question that was raised, sent to me by one of our citizens saying, how do you serve these senior citizens from mobility perspective? They live in the suburbs and they don't want to move elsewhere. They want to age in place. One of the solutions may surprise you, may not be coming from the transportation or mobility aspect, is ADU. ADU, also called mother-in-law suite, granny flat. There's reason for that. So multi-generational arrangement will help solve affordable housing, diverse housing, and can also solve mobility issues. So I just want to answer that question now.
Thanks. Taiwo.
Thank you. So yesterday we launched our social district. We call it the border of refreshments outside, I think, where people, good times don't stop when you get out of a drinking or eating establishment. You go from 12 p.m. to 9 p.m. Now there's a boundary. It's somewhere around downtown. In other words, we want to use it to support private establishments, restaurants, and bars, especially coming out of this pandemic. But 2 things that I'd like to see to happen in the next couple of years for us here is if we can close down more streets for pedestrian activities. So we dedicate more streets to people than vehicles. Hopefully that's something we can do on certain smaller streets that support entertainment areas. And the second thing is I'd like to champion the introduction of a streetcar system into our transit menu of transit options for our residents. We have the streets to do it. We have the ability to do it. And for a city of 300,000 people, it's something that is definitely on the horizon for us. So be on the lookout for that. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. I'd encourage everyone to go ahead and click all those links in the chat before they disappear. This is a really great discussion. We covered a lot of topics. I realize now that our government setup is much easier than a lot of other places, so I'm thankful for that. If you have any questions that we didn't really get to cover today, feel free to reach out to us. If you're seeking AICP credits, the session is eligible. You can watch this webinar again or share it with a friend or a colleague via our website, imaginelexington.com, or see it on Lex TV on Saturday at 1. Again, I want to express deep gratitude to our panelists, Emily from Louisville Metro, Taiwo from City of Greensboro, Amy from Knoxville, Knox County, and Jim from Lexington. And also thank our live Q&A support, which was done by Valerie Friedman, and our tech support, Libby Jefferson, and then our Lex TV folks. And of course, thanks to all of you in the audience and for allowing me to moderate this exciting roundtable. The Mornings with Planning webinar series will continue to discuss new ways to reconnect, reimagine, and respond in a new reality. And we want to hear from you. What topics should we discuss as we move Lexington forward together? Email us at imagine@lexingtonky.gov to let us know. We will be back on the first Wednesday of next month, April 6th. So look out for an email or check back on our social media accounts for upcoming topics. For more information on future sessions and to access the recording from this webinar, and to learn more about planning in Lexington, visit imaginelexington.com or lexingtonky.gov/planning, and follow us on social media. Thank you for spending your morning with us, and we'll see you next time.